Expired. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Director Mulvaney, thank you for being here. It's actually productive to have someone here who listens to our questions and tries to answer them. And you've been criticized for having 2 full-time jobs. I, for one, thank you for your work and your service. And someone as bright and with your work ethic, I wish you had 2 other full-time jobs in addition to that. But with respect to your office, I have to say that for $250 million, I'm not all that impressed with your office. And I'm curious, how long is the lease on that building?
Oh, I forget. I've got 5 different leases we track, Congressman. I'm sorry, I cannot remember off the top of my head how long the lease is. The lease is with, it's the OCC or OTS? With who, though? It's 20 years with 2 5-year options, and it's with the OCC. The Office of Controller Currency owns my building.
Thank you. Before we dive into the CFPB, I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity just to put a plug in for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative Fund. From Michigan, the Great Lakes are important to the Midwest and to our country. The Great Lakes have over 20% of the world's freshwater supply, and the funding is critical. And it's, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's even as much as the CFP's budget. So,
point well taken. I will mention that to the OMB director next time I see him.
Thank you. I want to clarify one point. You've been beat up a little bit today by the ranking member and Mr. Sherman and Mr. Ellison for your initial comments where you suggested that the statute just requires that you appear and not testify. And I think maybe your subtlety has been lost because you weren't here saying that and asking for a gold star for being willing to testify and get kudos for that. I want to make this point and make sure you agree with this. You're here saying that you want to be accountable, you want to be on appropriations, and you don't believe the statutes the way it's written today makes a lot of sense in terms of our job as members of Congress. Is that a fair summary of your position?
Look at it this way. I mean, let's say that the next director comes in and takes the position, you know what, so many folks have talked about how independent this agency has been. In fact, its very founding was supposed to be independent. It was supposed to be explicitly removed from oversight by Congress. We weren't supposed to be micromanaged by Congress. There's a lot of language out there from Elizabeth Warren, Senator Warren, amongst other people, who go exactly to that point. If you take that and combine that with the actual language of the statute, I think you can make a very compelling case that I don't have to answer your questions, and neither does that person. I think that's wrong.
Do you think the president should be able to fire you without cause?
I do.
Okay. So I really enjoyed your January 23rd article in the Journal, and I underlined 3 sections of it. One, you said, the Bureau's previous governing philosophy was to push the envelope aggressively under the assumption that we were the good guys and the financial service industries were the bad guys. And I couldn't have said it better myself. Under the prior tenure of Director Cordray, his attitude was business is bad, particularly banks, and if you're in the banking business and you're profitable, then you must be taking advantage of consumers. And my concern is there's numerous articles out there. There was a great one a year and a half ago in the Atlantic magazine about the culture of the CFPB and the politically motivated culture there and this mindset. And you've said great things about the bureaucrats there and how talented and dedicated they are this morning, and I appreciate those comments. But can you comment on the culture? Are you able to change that culture so that this mantra of business is bad is not the prevailing thought of the bureaucrats?
I think if he were still here, Mr. Delaney and I would agree on more than he probably recognizes, which I do agree that the personality of an organization often takes on the personality of the person, the man or woman in charge. And to an extent that Mr. Cordray had that attitude about business and about banking and about the role of the CFPB, the Bureau, I think that pervaded the operation of the Bureau. I have an entirely different attitude towards what financial services are and what they can do to help people. So we are going to look at this with a healthy balance of the folks who make loans and the folks who take loans. And try and do our best to protect consumers without removing choices from consumers.
You know, in the editorial, you also talk about the CID process, and you say, where do the people charged go to get their time, their money, their good names back? If a company closes its door under the weight of a multi-year CID at the CFPB, what about the workers that are laid off as a result? In my prior life, I can tell you, I know of 1,000 people that lost their jobs because of the CID process. It really, when the federal government comes in, there's not many good things that happen, even for good actors. And my question is, have you changed the CID process, or have you looked at it such that if it's a bad actor, who cares what happens to him? If it's a good actor and there's no finding and the file's closed, the company shouldn't be put out of business.
Mr. Chairman, I can change the way the place is run while I am there. Only you folks can change the underlying DNA of the Bureau. That means changing the statute.
Great. Well, I appreciate your comments. I also thought giving guidance is important because as it existed in the prior administration, the CFPB acted more like the mafia than a consumer protection agency. My time's expired. I recognize the gentleman from Georgia.